Hi everybody, so I'm going to explain to you how to complete this curriculum design presentation. We're not going to do it as an interview because, as you know, the interviews take a long time, so we're just going to do it as a presentation. And this presentation, I don't mind if you do it in pairs or at most a group of 3. Okay, so essentially what you've got to do is have a look through your curriculum plans and your evaluations and discuss all the factors that impacted either positively or negatively on your implementation of the curriculum. And in this, we want you to also make recommendations for addressing the impact of, various factors that impacted the delivery of your curriculum. So this, I'm giving you the template of a presentation that you could use. Now, I don't mind if you change this into a Prezi or anything else, that would be fine. Or you could just use this template. So this is your cover page. You need to say who it's submitted by with your name and ID of either you or the members of the group. Okay, on the next slide is just a description of the assessment, which you can just copy and paste actually, so it's just the same, it's just an overview of the assessment. A table of contents, and as you can see, these are the various parts of the presentation that you're going to have to include. A definition of relevant key terms, which we'll explain. Actually, I'll just leave this here and I'll explain each of the contents as we go through them. You can read them and you'll have the template so you'll be able to see. So the first slide is a definition of key terminology. So as far as the curriculum design course is concerned, we've used a few terms with you and we'd like you to define them and to actually use them in this presentation. So the first one we could include is syllabus. So define what syllabus is. Now we've done this before, I think, anyway, so it should be okay. What is curriculum design? Explain what is scope and what is sequence. What do we mean by long-term, medium-term and short-term planning? Because all of these terms you're going to use in this presentation, so it would be good to define them to start with. The second thing that we're looking at is the context in which this curriculum planning took place, and implementation actually. So just give us a brief overview of the setting, or if you're working in a group, the settings in which this curriculum planning and implementation took place. So, generally we know about the settings. Where was it? We don't need to know the name of it, but what type of school or setting was it? Was it a kindergarten, primary school, high school, workplace setting? Whereabouts was it? Give us a little bit of details about how many teachers or employees are in your department, how many trainers, the general kind of thing we usually talk about when we ask you to describe settings, and we ask you to do this for almost every assignment, so you should have a good idea about what to do here. Okay, the next part focuses on long-term curriculum planning. And these are the factors that affect the development and implementation of long-term planning in the setting. So first of all, the first thing we want you to do is to evaluate the scope and the sequence of long-term curriculum plan. And we want you to include the long-term curriculum plan as Appendix 1, so that comes at the end. And first of all, how easy was it for you to access the scope, the long-term curriculum plan? I know that some of you had a very small long-term curriculum plan that really didn't have very much in it, and those of you that are working in the workplace settings, your long-term curriculum plans were divided into quarters, whereas other people's long-term curriculum plans were divided into terms or semesters, and there was a sequence in which each of the content was included. So here I want to explain the next thing is, the next part here is what time period is covered by this long-term plan. So, and also from your experience, do you feel that how much content there is and how much detail we go into the content to be covered in this time period? If it's a year or a quarter, is it too much or is it not enough, or is it just right? I know that one of you only had something like research and movie maker for the whole period, and really, is that broad enough depth, and is that deep enough? Is that enough content to be covered in that year time period? Also, do you think that the order in which the content was presented to learners is appropriate? Of course, you've got your long-term plans which sequence the different content areas. Do you think that the order in which the content was presented in that long-term plan was appropriate? And you need to justify your answers. Why do you think that is? So give us some justification here. Then you have to describe the factors that could or actually did impact the implementation of the long-term curriculum plan at the setting. For example, in schools, particularly local government schools, there's lots of things that go on. There are national days, there's holidays, there's also the plays and events and performances that go on that actually stop you from being able to implement some parts of the long-term plan at the time in which they were supposed to be implemented. So maybe some of the planning needed to be changed, maybe the orders need to be changed. So this is about the long-term curriculum plan. And we want examples from, if you're working in a group, examples from both groups, or maybe you have similar experiences that you could comment on. Then we're talking about the medium-term curriculum planning. Now, some of you actually have medium-term plans, and some of you we asked to look at the long-term plan, talk to your MSTs, and try and work out what parts of that long-term plan you could create a medium-term plan for the time that you were in school or in the workplace setting. So, for example, your medium-term plans may only be 4 weeks long because that's how long you were there. They may be a bit longer. It depends on whether you created it yourself or whether they presented you. And again, you have to evaluate the scope and sequence of the medium-term plan, and we'll keep that as Appendix 2. So the medium-term plan is Appendix 2, and it's included at the end. Again, how easy was it for you as a student to access it? Did they have a medium-term plan, or did you have to develop it yourself? And if so, how did you decide what to include? You have a long-term plan with a list of subject areas to cover. What did you decide to take from that long-term plan to put in your medium-term plan? Again, well, this is what we've already just covered, but what time period is covered by the medium-term plan? Is it 4 weeks? Is it a bit longer? Do you think that you've included or was included enough content and in enough depth to be covered in that time period, in the 4 weeks that you were there? And do you think that the order in which the content was presented to learners is appropriate? For example, does lesson 2 follow on from lesson 1? You know, is the order appropriate? And we need you to justify why you think it is. And then in terms of implementing that medium-term plan, or the plans that you had for the 4 weeks, your idea of what you would cover in the 4 weeks, did you actually manage to do that? What were the factors that could have or actually did impact your implementation of this medium-term curriculum plan at the setting? And again, those kind of things could be related to the events, or perhaps, and if you're in a company, perhaps they needed some training quite quickly in another area and you weren't able to implement the training you thought you were going to do. So why did you manage to implement them effectively? And if you didn't, what were the factors that prevented you from doing this? And you know, what could you do perhaps to avoid this in the future? And here we're talking about the short-term curriculum planning. That's the lesson plans that you have developed from the medium-term plan. So you had your long-term plan, developed the medium-term plan from that, and then you developed 4 lessons, or a full week of lessons. But in lots of our cases where there was only one ICT lesson being taught a week, it meant that you had to teach 1 lesson every week. So you had 4 lessons over a period of 4 weeks. So we need you to evaluate the scope and sequence of the lesson plans that you did, and the rationale you used to develop them for the target learning community. So, for example, how did you decide what you were going to teach from that medium-term plan? And how did you decide exactly what you would teach in each of the lessons? And did one lesson follow on? Did you design it so that one lesson followed on directly from another? The next thing is to justify the time period you proposed to implement them. Was it 1 day, 1 lesson per day for 1 week, or 1 lesson per week for 4 weeks? Just tell me why you did that. And then justify the order that you proposed to present the content to learners. So that's just explaining really why and how you devised those short-term plans, those detailed lesson plans. Next, we're talking about evaluating exactly what you did. So we want you to describe the factors that are related to the setting that could have or actually did impact the implementation of your lessons. For example, we're talking about factors related to the setting. So was it because they had events, or was it because they had exams, or was it because the MST kept saying to you, well, we're not teaching today? Why was it that you didn't manage to deliver all of these lessons as successfully as you would want it to? So this is the kind of thing we want you to put here. There could be many reasons why maybe you were successful in implementing all of the lessons, in which case maybe there were no real impact on your lessons, but what factors could have impacted your implementation if none of them actually did? So the next one is we're asking you to evaluate how successfully your lesson plans or the implementation of the schedule, if you like, were adapted in response to the setting-based factors described in the previous slide. As we said, if you don't, actually this slide I'm going to delete it, I think. I'll include it on the other one. So forget this slide. In this slide here, short-term curriculum planning, I want you to explain how your lesson plans were adapted as a result of reflection and feedback on implementation. So, for example, you taught a lesson, you reflected on it. How did you change, or how did you change what you were going to teach next as a result of the reflection on your first lesson? For example, maybe you thought that your behavior management strategies weren't effective in your first lesson and you wanted to try some other behavior management strategies in the second lesson. Or maybe you didn't have enough time in the first lesson, so you had to use part of the second lesson to finish off what you did in the first. So we want to know how your lesson plans were adapted as a result of your own reflection. And maybe reflection based from your comments made by your MST. What did they say about your first lesson, which you managed to include in your second, or from your MCT, or from the peer observation? So, for example, you all had peer observation. So what did your peer say about your lesson, and what did you take from your peer observation and change, and how did you use that observation or the comments they made to change your second lesson? Finally, we need a list of all the academic reference you used in the presentation. Now, anytime you use an academic reference on a slide, we need to at least have that reference in the notes part at the bottom of the slide or on the slide itself, so that when we're looking at these references here, we can say, oh yes, you used that reference on slide 4 or slide 5. We really need to know that. Otherwise, you could just be putting any references you like there. We don't know where they came from. And then the appendices need to go at the end. And they should include the first appendix, Appendix 1, your long-term plans, Appendix 2, medium-term plans, Appendix 3, short-term plans, which are your lesson plans. Any other the comments that you've got from your peers or anything else should actually go into the slides themselves as screenshots. So this is a way, I want you to create this presentation as a press-to-play presentation. And I know you've done some of those for Anda before, but so what I want you to do is to actually record your voices speaking on it, explaining exactly why you've included what you've done, given reasons for your actions. And so all I have to do is when you submit it to me is just watch it, and I'll be able to see exactly what you've done. So here are the contents again. This is what you need to do. I will see you on Sunday from 8 to 9 and we'll review this again. But in the meantime, you have this video. You're going to be able to start work on your presentation or decide who you're going to work with. I'll put a list on Google Drive and you can put who your group is and who you're going to be working with. Okay, good luck.